driving an early JK two-door with a 6.2 LS in it. I get a lot of guys call me and say, do you support two-doors? And yes, we do. We've been doing two-doors since the very beginning. There are a few differences between the two-door swap and the four-door swap, but not a whole lot. The engine compartments are basically the same in the JKs, whether you get a two-door or a four-door. Everything happens behind the front doors. The fuel tank is shorter, so the exhaust must be routed differently. But the biggest concern with the two-door is the drive shaft, the pinion angle, separation angle, and your lift. If you got a two-door with no lift, you shouldn't have any issues. If you're on a 2-inch lift, even a 3-inch lift, you probably won't have any issues. The two-door is short coupled. That means the wheelbase is shorter than on a four-door or a long wheelbase. The front differential and drive shaft doesn't matter so much because that doesn't really change. But in the rear, we're going from a drive shaft that's close to 4 feet long to a drive shaft that's about 2 feet long or even shorter. What makes it worse is if you lengthen the drivetrain or the powertrain, that angle even gets steeper. We get two doors in all the time that have 3-inch plus lifts, sometimes 4, 5, 6-inch lifts, and they have vibrations before the swap and after the swap. When you hit a certain RPM and a certain load, the drive shaft can start to vibrate. The angle on the CV joint or the RZEPA, whatever you're running, may not be able to handle that load at that angle. So we want to keep those angles as shallow as possible. Now you never want the angle to be 0 because you need to have that joint move, but you want to have it plus or minus 2 or 3 degrees. So the problem in a two-door is if you got a 6-inch lift, you can roll that pinion up until it aims at the transfer case, but then your springs are going to be aiming backwards. You're going to be rolling the spring perches back, sway bar pickup points back, and all that. So that's when the separation angle comes in. The separation angle is the angle between the pinion and then those components. We did a two-door not long ago, and it had a 5-inch lift on it, a long arm, and the customer ordered new Dynatrac axles. When we installed the axles and lined up the pinion to the transfer case, the upper coils were twisted so bad that they were rubbing on the frame. Dynatrac had built an axle for a four-door, and this is a two-door. So if you're going to go more than 4 or 5 inches, it's probably best to get an axle with the brackets not installed, and then set the pinion angle, set the coil perches and all that, and then weld them on afterwards. Trying to take a stock axle or a Dana over-the-counter axle and put it in a two-door with a 6-inch lift is going to be problematic. Now for the majority of the two-door builds that have 2 or 3-inch lifts, it's usually not a problem. You want to go with the shortest powertrain that you can get. And if you go with a 6L80 LS, that's pretty darn close to the stock configuration. We do move the transfer case back a ½ an inch to an inch, but that doesn't seem to matter a whole lot. Now that's using the 6L80. A lot of guys call me up and say, I've got a 6L90 and I want to put it in my two-door with a 6-inch lift. That might be a problem because now you've got a powertrain that's longer and you've got a lift that's setting that angle really steep. So there's a few things you can do. One is you want to lower the back of the transmission down. Now you can only go down so far before the pan's going to hit the cross member, but we give you some leeway there. We actually give you spacers that allow you to raise and lower the transmission. So you're going to want to lower that down a little bit. That's going to help. As stated previously, you want to roll that pinion angle up. If you don't have adjustable control arms, get adjustable control arms. You technically don't need adjustable control arms on top and bottom, but you should get them, and here's why. When you lift the JK, it sucks the axles inward because these control arms run in an arc. So if you look at a two-door with a 6-inch lift from the side with stock mid-arms, it looks like the wheels have been pulled inward, and it looks goofy. When you get a quality lift like Metal Cloak or the others, they're going to give you a longer control arm because they know that they have to reset that wheel back to the center of the wheel well. So they might be an inch or an inch and a half longer than stock. Then you have the ability to adjust those control arms so that you can set the pinion angle to wherever you want. So my advice is, after the build is done and you have all the weight on the vehicle, and it's really important that you set your suspension up at ride height with the weight on the vehicle. If you set it up on a rack with the wheels drooped, you're not going to get accurate measurements. So at ride height, you're going to make sure the axles are centered, and I highly recommend that you get an adjustable track bar. Yes, there are offset brackets, but an adjustable track bar will let you get it right where it needs to be. Again, on a two-door and a four-door, when you raise the vehicle up, it's going to suck that axle over to the side because the track bar is set up to be neutral at ride height. So we need to put that back. Some of the kits come with an offset bracket, and that does work. However, I would rather you get a proper adjustable track bar. So at ride height, you're going to center the axle with your track bar. Then you're going to set your pinion angle up. There's been a lot of discussion what's better, positive or negative pinion angle, and I spoke to the guys over at Adams about this, and they basically said it's voodoo. Rate less with positive pinion angle and others with negative, and I've tried both. But you get the point. You don't want the pinion angle to be too steep. If you can get a high pinion axle, by all means go for it, because that's going to, again, lessen the pinion angle. If you have a low pinion pumpkin, that's going to make the angle steeper. The length of the drive shaft is always important, because the longer the drive shaft, the less the angle is going to be, and when the suspension articulates, the less angle change there's going to be. That's why the four-doors really don't have a problem, because their drive shafts are relatively long, so you can articulate a lot, and those angles are never going to reach their maximum limit. On some two-doors, that may not be true. You can run limit straps, and again, run the shortest powertrain you can get. I've had guys run 6L90s in two-doors when they could have run 6L80s, and it's just a no-brainer to run the 6L80 if you're going to pick up that extra drive shaft length. On the same theme, the suspension setup is critical in a two-door. Because it is short coupled, well, that means that everything happens a little bit more twitchy. In fact, I believe the steering gear in the two-doors have a different ratio. They actually slow them down. Now, while you have a better turning radius in a two-door, they slow the steering down because when you're short coupled, things happen faster. So any problems in your suspension is going to be exaggerated with a two-door. If your camber is off, your caster is off, your wheelbase is off, your track is off, your towing is off, you're probably going to feel it more with a two-door. When you have a V6 in it, you got 200, 250 horsepower, that's one thing. You put a V8 in it, like the one I'm driving now with over 400 horsepower, a two-door can get out of hand pretty quick. Now, this vehicle is actually driving pretty good. It's actually driving great. So go back and watch my video on suspension setup. So finishing out the suspension, do your diligence. Go back and look at my video on suspension setup. Get the vehicle at ride height. Run the lowest lift that you can run. I know that the trend used to be run the highest lift with smaller tires because it looked really cool like a monster truck, and then we kind of came full circle. Run the lowest lift with the biggest tires and highline fenders, and now we're starting to go back to the monster truck look. So just be realistic. If you can get away with a 2-inch, 2.5-inch lift with 35s, do it. There's plenty of highline fenders out there that'll let you do that. Set the engine as far forward as you can get it, and with our easy mounts, that's not hard to do because they're adjustable. Set the transmission right down the center of the frame hoops, unless you have a aftermarket axle with offset pumpkins. Get your pinion angle so it's not steep in the rear. If you have to roll that pinion angle up, do it. If the springs have been rolled back too far, compromise. Try to get to a point that it works, and if it doesn't work, you may have to cut some brackets off and change your separation angle. Now let's talk about the other biggest difference in a two-door swap. That's the exhaust. On the four doors, we run the downpipes off the manifolds, through the converters, straight back, over the cross member on both sides. So that means the passenger side crosses right in front of the fuel tank. This way, everything is above the cross members. You can run flat skid plates. But in a two-door, you can't do that, and in most of the Hemis, you can't do it. So you end up running the pipe in front of the cross member. So that down pipe on the passenger side goes through the converter, makes a 90-degree turn, and goes along the front of the cross member. That is actually the way Jeep runs that pipe. Jeep flattens that pipe a little bit so that it's an oval shape, and that way it gets you a little bit more ground clearance and it doesn't hang down much below the cross member. And that's what we do on a lot of the two-door builds, is we do flatten that pipe out so that you gain some ground clearance. Now that does tend to put a little more heat into the transmission pan, so you might want to wrap the pipe there with some Thermotech tape. If you are running skid plates, please wrap the pipes above the skid plate, because all you're going to do is turn that space between the body and the skid plates into an oven. I've seen fuel tanks melt, I've seen the seals on transfer cases melt and oil come out. And if you are running full skids, think about venting them, cutting a couple of holes in there to get some airflow. In the early days, Chrysler in 7 and 8, they had a plate style skid plate, and they found that not only did heat get trapped, but debris would get up in there, and then the converters could potentially catch it on fire. So they skeletonized their skid plates in about 2009. You do want to protect your fuel tank, of course, and most of the manufacturers remove the heat barrier Jeep provides between the fuel tank and the exhaust. Now, running the pipe across the front of the cross member and then down the driver's side can be a little bit tricky. One way we do it is we'll have the driver's side pipe come down 2 1/4, 2 1/2, and then it'll flare out to 3 inches, and then we'll intersect that with the passenger side pipe. Now you can run a Y there, so you have a 2 1/4, 2 1/4 with a 3-inch out, or you can section the passenger side pipe right into the driver's side 3-inch pipe if you're good at fabricating and welding. You can also make that turn and then go back into a dual inlet muffler, which is kind of the way I prefer it. I think the LSs and the LTs sound better with a common chamber muffler, so our standard exhaust system uses one. It's a MagnaFlow style stainless steel 18-inch bodied muffler. There's also a 14-inch body muffler if you want a more aggressive sound. Then you can do whatever you want up over the axle. We run a 3-inch pipe. Our standard routing is to go up over the axle and then out behind the driver tire so that you don't lose departure angle, so the pipe sits between the departure angle of the bumper and the tire. Some guys that don't go off-roading will just shoot it straight out the back under their bumper, and that looks really cool, especially if you put twice pipes on it or a chrome tip. But if you go off-road, you're probably going to end up smashing that. And if you want it to be quieter, you can run the muffler in the rear and then run it out the passenger side tire. That's how my own personal JK is, and that's pretty quiet. So those are really the main concerns on a two-door. Keep the drivetrain as short as possible. Set your suspension up so it's solid, otherwise it's going to be squirrely. Get your drive shaft angles at a minimum. Build a proper two-door exhaust system. We hope to offer one in the future. Just wanted to add a little comment. This Jeep has over 150,000 miles on it, and it drives and feels better than a lot of the new Jeeps that I've driven. It's extremely tight, no rattles. This customer has really taken care of his Jeep, and if he takes care of his engine like he takes care of his Jeep, he will get a long life out of this engine, and that's when the ROI, or the return on investment, comes in on a V8, because you can go through 2 or 3 V6s for the lifespan of one V8 engine, and you can enjoy better gas mileage or economy and drivability in the interim.